candidate from Carleton University named Justin Thibeault. He's been studying the prison system very closely and done a lot of research on it, specifically on the new measures that the Conservative government has said that they will take, including something called double bunking, which means putting 2 prisoners for every cell, cells originally designed for 1 person. And Justin Thibeault, you've obtained a briefing note through access to information requests. I want you to share with our viewers. This comes from a senior bureaucrat at Corrections Canada who advised Minister Vic Toews that the practice of double bunking is not ideal. Now, the memo is dated February 16th, and the Senior Deputy Commissioner of Corrections Services Canada wrote this. I just want to show our viewers. It is important to note that the increased use of double bunking places significant stress to the staff and the infrastructure of an institution. Further expansion of double bunking increases the risk to staff and offender safety in the institution. Now, that's a memo from the Senior Deputy Commissioner to Vic Toews in February 16th. I want to show you when I put this to Vic Toews before last March on our program. Here's what he had to say.
I think they're humane. It meets all appropriate standards, and I've yet to see a court in Canada say that double bunking done appropriately is unconstitutional. There's no suggestion of that.
Justin Thibeault, what does this new document that you've obtained tell you about how the minister is proceeding in terms of this policy?
Well, before we get into the document, first I'd like to talk about a couple more contradictions with Vic Toews' statement. First is that it doesn't violate any international standards. In fact, it violates the UN Standard for Minimum Treatment of Prisoners, Section 9.1, which states, and I'll just read it here, where sleeping accommodation is individual cells or rooms, each prisoner shall occupy by night a cell or room by himself. It also violates CSC Commissioner's Directive 550, which also says that single bunking is the most appropriately correctional practice. Now, what the briefing note to the Minister of Public Safety dated 16 February shows is that the second in command at CSC basically had told the minister before he decided how to decide which policy to absorb the influx of new prisoners, that double bunking was not the way to go. And the minister has not taken this advice and has decided to go his own
Justin
direction.
Thibeault, he's saying that, you know, you may not find it the best practice, but he's saying there's nothing illegal about it and nothing constitutional legal, to use his words, and that it's their way of saving money with this influx of prisoners that may come from their tough on crime policies. What's the problem with that?
Well, the problem with that is that it's going to create more violence in our penitentiaries. We only have to look back to the 1970s and 1980s, thinking about incidents at Kingston Penitentiary, British Columbia Penitentiary, and Archambault, where double bunking and overcrowding was an institutional reality at that point, to see the surges, the riots, and other forms of violence that emerged in our prisons. This is what the Senior Deputy Commissioner is referring to. It poses a risk to the safety of staff and prisoners alike.
But why? There are other documents, and you've written about this, and Justin Thibeault writes a fair bit about this on his blog. You've said that there are reports that Corrections Services Canada is planning to expand capacity by building 35 new institutions. Now, if they're planning to expand capacity, first of all, can you verify how you've got that information that they're planning to build that many prisons and institutions, and if they do, why the need to double bunk at all?
Well, the report about the 35 expansions at existing facilities was a report by Rob Tripp of the Kingston Whig Standard. I tried to follow up with Correctional Services of Canada to find out if that was indeed an accurate report, and they responded that they're not able to release their plans at the time, which is really status quo for CSC when you ask them for information. Now, if the reports turn out to be right, it should still be noted that a lot of these facilities are going to be built with double bunking in mind, which leads to the issues that I just discussed.
All right, Justin, I want to get some comment on these thoughts from the two MPs I'm joined. Glenn Thibeault, first of all, does the NDP have a problem with this double bunking? I mean, if indeed, you know, we're in fiscally difficult times, what's the problem with double bunking?
Well, first of all, it goes against Correctional Services Canada's own internal policies, where they say that single bunking is the only appropriate correctional way of housing inmates. So if these are the experts, these are the people that are having to do this every day. You talk to the guards aren't in favor of this. They're the ones that are recognizing that if you have 2 inmates in one cell, the potential for an increase in violence is going to dramatically increase, and then they have to get involved in that. And we're also forgetting the fact that 80% of inmates that are in our institutions right now are either have some type of an addiction or some type of mental illness. They have no opportunity for rehabilitation when you're constantly dealing with the potential for violence, when you're in that situation.
But listen, let's be realistic, Mark Holland. It costs about $150,000 to the Canadian taxpayer to keep someone incarcerated every year. I mean, are the Conservatives simply saying, look, you know, the fact is these people have committed a crime, we'll double bunk, it's not luxury, but it's not illegal, and that's just the way it's going to fly because we can't afford taxpayer money to build new institutions like that. What's your view?
Well, the problem is that that violence isn't contained to the institution. So even if people don't care about the prison guards and don't care about the inmates, the evidence all shows that this leads to higher rates of reoffending, so that the people who leave institutions end up committing many more crimes. So not only does that create enormous costs in terms of victimization, but it also creates enormous additional costs in incarcerating those people who commit more crimes. So it perpetuates a cycle of violence that is extremely costly to society in general. The other point that I would make here is that I think sometimes we divorce ourselves from the reality of a prison. You know, we say that there's only bad people there. You know, I can't tell you the number of cases I hear where you see somebody who's mentally ill and they have nowhere else to put them. Or what about the parents of Ashley Smith who had to watch their daughter, a teenage daughter, die in jail because of mistakes that were made there? You know, at the end of the day, we have to remember that these people are people's daughters and sons, and that we have a responsibility for their health and well-being, and that the purpose of prison is rehabilitation. It is to make people better. And as a father of 3 children, I always try to keep in my mind that God forbid one of my children should make a mistake and end up in a penitentiary, that it's a place where they can get better, where they can get healthy.
But I mean, listen,
reintegrated.
We don't have a Conservative on this panel, but I mean, this is, you know, I can only hear the sense that, listen, all the Liberals and the NDP think about is the rights of the criminal, the prisoner, but what about being, you know, tough on crime and the rights of the victim? And that's where the money should go. That's the Conservative line on this, not building,
Evan,
you know, single bunking and worried about the rehabilitation program.
Victims organizations aren't even calling for longer sentences. What they're calling for is the inmates to get the treatment so they don't reoffend. That's what they're looking for. We have 25 years of data from the U.S. with the George Bush style of prison systems, and it hasn't been working. So what the victims groups are calling for is to ensure that the inmates get the help that they need so they don't reoffend. And right now, this crime and punishment agenda isn't putting that into place.
I got 10 seconds, Mark.
Yeah, Evan, just let's follow the evidence. Let's do what works. We've tried what was being done, and we're chasing after now the Republicans in California. It was a disaster. Let's base it on what works. Let's build community capacity. Let's break cycles of violence and addiction, and actually make our communities safer instead of playing politics with an issue as emotional as crime.
All right, I gotta cut it off here, you guys. Mark Holland, Liberal MP in Toronto, Glenn Thibeault, NDP MP here in Ottawa, and Justin Piche, who's a PhD candidate at Carleton and who's become an expert on the prison system. Thanks for sharing those documents you obtained with us, Justin Piche. We got lots more to come on Power and Politics. We're going to talk about the beginning of Omar Khadr's trial today, starting in Guantanamo.